Hello and welcome. My name is Kay. Welcome back also to those of you who joined us on Tuesday. And I'd like to also thank all of my colleagues at e-flux, in particular Magdalena and Mariana, for making this week's talks possible. On behalf of e-flux and e-flux Journal, whose editors Julieta Aranda, Brian Kwan Wood, and Anton Vidokle regret they cannot be here tonight, I am delighted to welcome the organizers of this evening and, of course, our guest, the musician, mathematician, professor, author, and among other things, music software developer, Guerino Mazzola. Guerino Mazzola is here tonight on the invitation of Bead, which is an international journal and research platform who are organizing a series of talks this week here as part of Composing Differences, curated by Virginie Bobin, which is also part of Art Squared, which is a month-long festival. Please join me in welcoming Virginie Bobin, the members of Bead, and of course, our guest tonight, Guerino Mazzola. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Virginie Bobin. I'm going to say a very quick word about Composing Differences, which is a one-week-long program conceived in collaboration with Bead and 3 other initiatives from France and the UK, Council, Open School East, and PAF, Performing Arts Forum. And the reason why we're here together this week is to investigate possible models and methodologies for the production and the dissemination of knowledge in between art and education institutions. So we've been working according different formats, private and public, across this week. You can still catch a few of the public events. Tomorrow morning there is a last session of a seminar that philosopher Tristan Garcia has been conducting for 2 days already at MoMA PS1. And Sunday we will all come together in the Dome in MoMA PS1 in order to tell you the stories of the projects we've been working on this week together with New York-based interlocutors. And I want to thank Bead for the event tonight. We've been witnessing the launch of their journal over the course of the week, and it's been a pleasure so far. I invite you all to check their website where they're sharing the recordings of different interviews they've been conducting as well. I, of course, want to thank e-flux for welcoming us tonight and making the presence of Guerino possible. Thank you for being here. And I'm also dutifully thanking the French Embassy, the French Institute, and Étant Donné Fund for Contemporary Art, who are allowing everyone to be here tonight, as well as MoMA PS1, who's collaborating with us on this project. Thank you all, and I hope to see you again this weekend.
Okay, so thank you, Virginie, and thank you to e-flux for hosting this event tonight. First, a couple of words on Bead. So Bead is a research platform and journal that will be launched next year. It's a project based on the idea that reason proceeds through acts of bordering and navigation within these diverse epistemic landscapes that such acts produce. Rather than considering art as an exceptional field of practices that would be situated outside of reason, we consider it to be an intrinsic part of these processes. This first year of inquiry is devoted to questioning and reflecting on our assumptions through conversations with philosophers, artists, activists, and scientists who work in close relation to these concerns. We're very pleased to introduce our second public talk at e-flux this week. Tonight we have a talk from Guerino Mazzola, whose category theory influenced work on the gestural constitution of music has been a major inspiration to Bead. So thank you, Guerino, for having accepted our invitation to take part in Bead's first year of inquiry. Guerino Mazzola is a professor of music, mathematics, and computational science, as well as an accomplished musician and philosopher. Since 2007, he's a professor at the School of Music, University of Minnesota, and he's developed a mathematical music theory and software. He's extraordinarily prolific, having published no less than 22 books and 130 papers, 23 jazz CDs as a pianist and composer, and a classical sonata. His talk tonight is called Melting Glass Beads, the Multiverse Game of Strings and Gestures.
Can you hear me? Yeah, it's okay, huh? Thank you very much for inviting me here. Yeah, the title is Melting Glass Beads, a multiverse game of strings and gestures, a little bit interdisciplinary. And it will be a PowerPoint presentation with some music also, and also some software. The whole thing here, the PowerPoint, is on my homepage here, www.encyclospace.org. And there is a part there which is called Talks. And in the Talks you can find the PowerPoint. You can also find a PDF if you don't like or you're not capable of downloading. It's roughly 40, 50 megabytes. Okay, so let's start with some reference to books which I have written on gesture theory. These are the books which are already existing. Most of them are in English. There's one in French, which I published at the IRCAM, the blue to the left. And then there is a new one which is not published yet, but I'm writing that with this also strange title, The Musical Multiverse of Gestures. It will come out in 2016. So here is the contents. First, I recapitulate, because I was asked to talk about Hesse's Glasperlenspiel, about Hesse's glass bead game, what it is, in a few words. Then I give a characterization of what I think it has been, namely it's a frozen glass beads game of facticity. Then I talk about those things which enable a change, an extension of that game's philosophy, namely the revolution of functors and gestures. So there are two kind of new directions which you can take to extend that game. Then I talk a little bit about gesture philosophy and cognitive science, just a little bit, because I'm not really a philosopher. I consider myself not as a philosopher. Then I go more specifically to that field where I've been working very concretely, namely gesture theory in music. And I also talk about gestural creativity, which is, of course, a very important way of being creative, namely through gestures. And then I go to this. I also play the game, if you see what I'm doing here. I play kind of the game, examples of what I could consider as being variants of the game, gesture and strings. So I'm talking a little bit about string theory in physics. And then I end up with a kind of a short summary on what I would consider as being a game in what I call pre-semiotic ontology. Okay? So, yeah, let's first recapitulate Hesse's Glasperlenspiel. It was published in 1943 here. And I'm sitting, I think it's better so you can see these things, right? Published in 1943. Because Hesse could not publish it in Germany. Hitler was still in power, so it was not possible to publish it there. And he got the Nobel Prize for this work in 1946. And in his materials, I have the German book, Materialien zum Glasperlenspiel. He writes something about the general philosophy behind this. And should I read it in German? Does it make sense for anybody to read it? No, not really. Huh? Okay. Let's give the English version here. But you can see, I mean, if somebody wants to check, it's really saying more or less the same. The glass bead game, represented a symbolic form of seeking for perfection, an approach to that mind which, beyond all images and multiplicities, is one with itself, in other words, to God. Now, what is very important to me is this unicity thing here. It's a unique thing, which is kind of they are looking for. I will come back to that because that's, I think, a critical point. Now, there is no really precise description of the game. Who has read the game? Some of you have read the book? Yeah. Totally. Fantastic. You guys, none of you read Glass? Get out of here. No, it's okay. Anyway, it's a strange book, I have to say. Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, some Nobel Prizes. Okay, so let's read a little bit about what you see here in English. A short description here. under the shifting hegemony of now this, now that science or art, the game of games had developed into a kind of universal language through which the players could express values and set these in relation to one another. Throughout its history, the game was closely allied with music and usually proceeded according to musical or mathematical rules. Now you see why I'm in this game here, because I'm a musician, mathematician. One theme, two themes, or three themes were stated, elaborated, varied, and underwent a development quite similar to that of this theme in a Bach fugue or a concerto movement. A game, for example, might start from a given astronomical configuration, or from the actual theme of a Bach fugue, or from a sentence out of Leibniz or the Upanishads. And from this theme, depending on the intentions and talents of the player, it could either further explore and elaborate the initial motif, or else enrich its expressiveness by allusions to kindred concepts. Beginners learn how to establish parallels by means of the game symbols between a piece of classical music and the formula for some law of nature. Experts and masters of the game freely move the initial theme into unlimited combinations. It should be stressed that this game is positioned 200 years ahead, so it's a game which is played in a far future, right? In this thing. And the mathematics of music being put together, that comes from the fact that Hesse knew Hans Kaiser, which was living in Bern in Switzerland, and was a kind of new Pythagorean who put together mathematical formulas and music. Perhaps some of you know his book Acroasis. So that was probably one of the sources of this kind of parallels. Okay, so why is it a frozen glass bead of facticity here? Now, if you look at what is facticity, I would like to cite Ludwig Wittgenstein, Tractatus, where his first sentence says, Die Welt ist alles, was der Fall ist. The world is everything that is the case. So this is kind of, what is true is what is the case. And this kind of facticity is, I think, characteristic for this game. Now, if you look what is characteristic when you look at the sources of Hesse, he was strongly referring to Gottfried Leibniz, who had invented this kind of, perfect language where people talk to each other by exchanging mathematical formulas. You can imagine how annoying a dating would be then with just, exchanging Leibniz Boolean expressions. Well, anyway, this is very facticity-oriented. And if you want to know more, I would recommend to read the book by Umberto Eco, The Search for the Perfect Language, where you have a nice description. It's not very mathematical, but it's, I think, very adequate. And the second reference of the book is the I Ching, this Jarrow-Stark oracle, or also cosmology book, which you still see nowadays. If you go to China, you get this oracle if you want in the streets. And you see it's made out of these broken or solid lines, and there are 3 of them here, but in total you always take 6 of them, so you have 6 times the possibility of taking 0 or 1, which gives you 64 possibilities. And when you make this oracle, you get one of those possibilities, and you get a number of sentences about your family, about the politics, about the weather, and whatever. So it's kind of a given cosmos. It's a fixed thing. So it's these principles, and also Leibniz refers to I Ching, thinking that the Chinese were very good mathematicians because they had this. Yes? No, but I have read it. You've read it? I've read the whole book, yes. I have it at home. You haven't consulted it? I have consulted it, and I had to laugh very often. It was very funny. Really? Yeah, I like it very much, The dragons which fly without head, or what are kind of strange things. Anyway, so there has also been an attempt to simulate the glass bead game by computer software. I have here a book which was published by Springer, Creativity and Form, by 2 Germans, and that is a very strange, annoying game. We have tried to play it, but it's really not inspiring. So that's kind of the facticity character of the whole game here, right? And now what I claim is that on that level, the Hesse's game has really been realized by a mathematical music theory. And I want to give you an example, yes, what I could consider as being the game, and I have written my first book in '85. You see, I'm very old. about groups and categories in music, where I have described the construction of a sonata. So you see here the music, and it has also been recorded by Patrizia Mazzola, which is not a friend of mine, nothing, just the same name. Okay, so I started with some music, and now you are in the situation of Hesse, exchange music, mathematics. I took the Hammerklavier Sonata. Let's listen to this fanfare. We come back to that. I took that and I made a mathematical analysis, yielding the following result, that the modulation structure of this opus 106 is governed by the symmetry group of the diminished seventh chord in the role of admitted modulation forces. So, modulations is changes of tonalities, yes, and of course you can have different models how you change these tonalities. One would be to take the scales and then shift them or invert them, get other scales, and using such a model you can really define the whole modulation, the whole harmonic structure. So that was the first thing. As a mathematician, I take the music, I give back a formula, and the formula tells you that the whole set of 12 major tonalities is spanned into two parts, one is the world, which is those which can be reached by the main B flat major, and then there are 4 others which cannot be reached, which is called the anti-world. This is a classical thesis, but I could simulate it by mathematical models, and now you have all this modulation. In the exposition you go to G, and then in the development you go to E flat, and then you go to the anti-world here. You stay in the anti-world, you go back to the world, and in the recapitulation you go to G flat and to G, and you end up with B flat, and you're done. So this is kind of the mathematical description, a short one, yes? So I took this principle, I said, okay, as a mathematician, I play the game. Somebody does not understand, probably. Okay, so I took this formula, I took this symmetry group, which is defined by the minor third, and I said, okay, let's take something similar. As a mathematician, I took something with the major third, and I constructed a chord which was defined by the major instead of the minor third. Then I got another sonata. Now, the modulation structure of my own sonata is governed by the symmetries of the augmented triad instead of the diminished seventh. You see the 3 pitch classes there. And I constructed the sonata, and there is not 2, but there are 3 words here. And I started exposition and all these modulations, all following these principles, right? So I just, I reconstructed some musical thing and used a model where you see the modulation is described by very strange, very symmetrical objects, which I'm not going to describe in detail. But these objects are such that Schoenberg's harmony, the classical harmony from 1911, has exactly the same, pivotal steps of modulation as this model. So the model is kind of congruent with Schoenberg's theory. So I took that, and you see, for example, if you go to this 2/4 relation of tonalities, I'll show you what came out here. This is what I got at the end, and I just play that. This modulation from G flat to A flat. So on. So I gave back music, you see. So I think this is, for me, an example of such a glass bead game. Now let's come to the general situation, the ontology of musical facts. Music is something very complex, but I usually represent it as a 3-dimensional ontology. One is realities. Music has a physical realities. Acoustics, it has a psychological because it refers to emotions. It has a symbolic one, of course. Then it's also a communication from the poiesis, from the making, to the work, which is called neutral level, and then it goes to aesthesis, which means those who receive the music, the listeners, And then it has a third dimension, which is expression, signification, and content. So music also, of course, has content. Yes, you can have, for example, a psychological content. It has, it means an emotion, things like that. So it has these dimensions, but these all are facts, yes? So if you look at the factual thing, you have these frozen glass beads, these kind of facts of different characters, but they are kind of frozen. Of course, everybody knows that this is not the whole truth about music, because music is also not only about what comes out, but also about the making, about the processes which generate those facts, yes, and about not only processes as, flowcharts, but also about gestures which are inside the flowcharts. So you see, facts is from the Latin facere, factum, what is made, yes? It's a result of a process, right? And of course, when you make music, you have to look also at these processes and gestures. And that's kind of the direction I want to take now. I want to expand this whole game, which is on the factual level, to processual and gestural realities, right? Okay, so I now describe two revolutions, which are essentially not very musical, but they have very strong musical consequences, which then lead us to extend the game. And I'm really stressing, extend the facts, not destroying them, but extending them to the levels of processes and gestures, yes? So the first revolution came from a very simple thing. It looks very simple. Euclid of Alexandria said, a point is something which has no part. So a point is like this. Of course, this is not a real point. This is much too large, but you imagine the kind of infinitely small thing. And a great mathematician, Alexander Grothendieck, he was against this. He said, this is not really true. By the way, Grothendieck is a very important mathematician, His contributions were essential for the solution of the famous Fermat conjecture and also for the Weyl conjecture. So, his contributions were really incredibly strong, and he published roughly 10,000 pages, yes. Just a crazy guy. Now, I think he's retired in southern France. Nobody knows exactly where he is. I have his address, but normally they don't know it. So, it's kind of a very strange guy. But really, he had very deep insights, and one is that he said, no, a point is not just, that blue thing to the right, but it is an arrow. And he introduced the reference. And in fact, if you look at the etymology of a point is what is the result of a puncture, of a pricking action, yes? Punctus, it's the result of something. He said, I should also introduce the origin, yes, the starting point, not only what comes out. This sounds very simple, but it has very deep consequences. And he revolutionized the whole algebraic geometry, where he was specialized, but later on also logic and all these things were consequences of this revolution. And there was one guy, Nobuo Yoneda. He found out that these arrows are really sufficient to characterize any object. And he told that lemma in the Gare du Nord in Paris in 1954, before he went back to Tokyo, to Sans MacLean, here, small photography. That's why I call it the Lemme de la Gare du Nord. And it was really an incredible result. You will see what it means. It's the following. So if you take an object, yes, I intentionally took a chimera. You will see in a second why I took one. I think also for Reza I took it because he likes so much chimeras. So that's your object. And if you go in an art exhibition, you have a sculpture, what do you do to understand it? You look from all sides, yes? You throw your arrows to the object from all sides, and you hope you can understand it if you walk around and you integrate all these perspectives. And that's exactly what Yoneda proved. He proves the following. If you have that object, of course he was talking about the mathematical object, but it's kind of philosophy behind that. If you look at it, call that arrow, the perspective F, then of course you might have a friend of you who also wants to understand, or perhaps he wants first to talk to you, what you think, and then generate his arrow by composing yours and his question arrow. So if you look at this system of arrows, yes, and you look at all of them, then the system is called the functor of the object. Yes, it's kind of the integral of all the perspectives. And Yoneda proved that this system of perspectives, this functor, characterizes X uniquely. So it's a very deep insight, philosophically speaking, because now you can replace the object by the sum of the perspectives, yes? So you don't know what is the object, but you know how it behaves when you look at it from all different parts. And then if you look at that, you can say, okay, I know the object because I know all the perspectives, right? So, yes, this was this lemma. Now let's make just a short summary. The functor, now, and that's the crazy thing of mathematicians, they can also define functors without having any object. You know, they just have to know how the relations work with different perspectives, but it isn't necessary that there is really an object which is there. It's just a kind of a system of perspectives. And that's kind of normal that they work with things where you don't have an object in the middle. Yes, you just have functors. I think this is really a revolution. And that's kind of normal now. It's standard for mathematicians. They talk about perspectives which don't have an object. So what is important here is that only the behavior of the functor is relevant. And its objects, if they exist, they don't matter. Right? Now, perhaps you know something very parallel from quantum mechanics. You know, the observables are there, the essential objects there, but they are chimeras, like, you know, what is called a wavicle, something which looks like a wave, but also like a particle, depending on how you look at it. And so only their behavior is important. When they act on state vectors, it is tangible, but it yields probabilities in a measurement and things like that. But the observable as such is kind of metaphysical. It's not really a physical thing. Okay, so this is kind of the first insight. And you see now why I chose the word chimera, because it behaves differently depending on your perspective, yes? It can look like a lion, it can look like a serpent, whatever you have. But it has just to be, you know, coherent in some global way. And that was the principles of my book, The Topos of Music, which I published, oh my God, 12 years ago already. Okay, so that's the first thing here. Now, you see that in music, now playing the game again, in music you can see a very famous composition, the Structure pour deux pianos, by Pierre Boulez. On est en France encore. Hein? Ah. Alors, there was I have to go back to English now. There was a very interesting analysis by Giorgio Ligeti of this piece. And he says, this is the first page, pianos. He says that this piece is just a system of threads. Threads are all these 12-tone series. You know, we have always 12 tones which are distributed and constructed in a very specific way. And this system of threads is what he analyzes. Now it turns out that these threads are really, you know, addressed points in the sense of Grothendieck. So I always call the point of view the address, where you stand, where you look at this. So it turns out in a very precise way that these threads are just such generalized arrows. So we are in the factorial approach. We have to make the analysis and also analyze, ligate this analysis in this factorial way. And it turns out that the following is true. The whole yoga of Boole's serial construction is a canonical system of factorial address changes. So it's kind of, you know, you have a point of view, an address, which in this case is an affine tensor product, doesn't matter what it is, just a mathematical construction. And you look at the chimera, which is the space of pitches, durations, loudness, and attacks. And then you change your point of view on this address, and the whole system generates all the series which you have in the piece. Yes? And that's a very systematic point of view. Of course, Boulez was not aware of the functorial perspective, but he really did it, yes, without, you know, knowing too much about mathematics, but he likes mathematics, that's known. Anyway, so you have this thing here, and knowing that, where perhaps somebody has read Ligeti's analysis, he uses a matrix, and that matrix is related to this kind of strange affine tensor product. So, okay, you have the analysis, and now, you know, as soon as you have this functorial thing, you can imagine you have the whole language of different points of view. Now you start creating new points of view, right? You have a whole system of, oh, I could look at it from here or from here, because Boulez didn't look at it from every perspective, right? He had just, you know, he had calculated for several months these things, and then he wanted to publish it for two pianists, and I think nobody was really happy. But, you know, he was a genius, so okay. Yeah, and we did it, that's by the way, described in the book Musical Creativity, if you want to go to the details. Yeah, we try to program the whole thing for 12 instruments. Yeah, so why 2 instruments? If you're serial, everything has to be 12. Why only 2 pianos? So we programmed it for 12 instruments, and we extended it in the software Rubato, which I will present also a little bit later. So we programmed all these things. We created these modules, and then you can hear something which comes out here, just a small part for the 4th movement, now for several instruments. Okay, so this is kind of our answer to this functorial thing. Now, this was the first revolution. Now, the second, I think, is even more dramatic, you know. Frege has defined what is a mathematical function, but his definition is some kind of abstract, which is really kind of even a lie when you look at mathematicians, how they describe functions. Look, they describe functions as follows. Yes, you have a domain X, you have a codomain Y, just 2 sets, for example. And then the function maps just the elements of X into elements of Y. And they draw an arrow, and that suggests that something is happening inside the shaft of the arrow, yes? But in fact, in mathematics, nothing happens. It's just an illusion. You think something is moving. It's not true. It just has the X, and then you have the teleportation. Then it's on the other side, right? So this is what really happens in mathematics. So the arrow is kind of an intuitive thing, but it's a lie, yes? It's kind of a nice intuition. It has its reasons, but it's not true. And you know, what is really hidden are the, you know, like an industrial plant, you know, they have the input, output, but, you know, the gestures, the robots inside are really hidden here. Let's make a concrete example. First I have to just cite 2 important mathematicians who have also observed it. Of course, I've not been the first one. Gilles Châtelet, a very important mathematician and philosopher, said, le geste est élastique, il peut se ramasser sur lui-même, sauter au-delà de lui-même et retentir, alors que la fonction ne donne que la forme du transit d'un terme extérieur à un autre terme extérieur, alors que l'acte s'épuise dans son résultat. So in one word, the gesture is elastic. It has kind of an inner life, whereas the function is just, you know, a juxtaposition of external terms, like, you know, the starting term, the ending term. And another one who is even more famous, Henri Poincaré, he said, localiser un objet en un point quelconque signifie se représenter le mouvement, c'est-à-dire les sensations musculaires qu'ils accompagnent et qui n'ont aucun caractère géométrique qu'il faut faire pour l'atteindre. So to get to a point, yes, you have to move your muscles. You have to really make this movement to get to that point. So that's kind of a very active thing here. It's not just this empty form. So yes, based on this critique, you know, let us see a very concrete example, a rotation. Yes, everybody knows what is a rotation. Here you have a rotation here, and you imagine that, you know, we have the trajectories of points of that object which is rotated. But what are mathematicians doing when they describe a rotation? Yes, they don't make that. They make this. I made a matrix equation. Yes, you see the x, y, z is the starting point, and the ABC is what comes out, or even more formally here as a matrix equation. So they describe something, and if you think this is a rotation, this is absolutely wrong. For example, you don't see that this matrix which you have here has an axis. To find out the axis is very difficult. You have first to calculate the eigenvalues and then the eigenvectors and all this kind of stuff, and then find out whether it has really a rotational angle and all those things, which is absolutely not contained in these formulas. So it's not true that the rotation is described by mathematicians. It's just a formula which, you know, is very far from the movement, yes? So I would just say in one word, the algebra compactifies gestures to symbolic formulas. And if you want it symmetrically, you can also say music unfolds symbolic formulas to gestures, yes? if you have, a harmonic scheme, whatever, you unfold it when you perform it. And I think I should just go and show you the difference here. I hope I can do that. To go to the software here, just a small example, and I think this is a short journey exercise here. Okay, I repeat it here. Now I make a horizontal reflection. Okay, this is inversion, yes? You see, but this is also this kind of teleportation. Now what I can do, I can make it, say, 15 seconds, and then I can play the whole thing in 15 seconds, but really as a gesture. Sorry, what was the question?
What's the orthogonal expansion and compression signify?
It signifies that I replace this symmetric movement, which is just, one movement, you have the start and the end, by a continuous family of intermediate transformations, yes? Okay, so that's a kind of the gestural thing, which shows this arrow, what happens in the middle of the arrow,
This is the program that you have created.
Yes. Yeah, this is because, if you make it with MIDI, you see there's also an arrow with MIDI, then it's very difficult to make these continuous things, yes? So it's a question of programming the whole MIDI, with the pitch bend and all that stuff.
It made it easier for you to compose what you wanted to compose, basically? Or?
Yes, of course. I mean, I'll show many more examples. That's a very good question, yes. Okay. So, yeah, we're not selling it yet, but I think in the future, your idea is... Oh, for now it's free. Okay. Let's go here, back to the thing. So you see that's the difference between just this flipping thing and what is intermediate, right? So there has been attempts, serious attempts, and I come back that when I talk about fanfare of Beethoven, to neutralize this stupid reflection. Yes, if you have x and you go to minus x, this is kind of a horrible thing because in the middle you compress this to 0. Now, mathematicians have found out how you can avoid that. Instead of moving through 0, you just leave it like a book, and then the whole shape is conserved. So this is what led them to introduction of complex numbers, and that's essentially the value of complex numbers is that you can do many things geometrically, which in the real numbers are just abstract things. So that's just in one word. And you see, you have here Polanski's A Dance of the Vampires. Who has ever seen that movie? It's a wonderful movie, yes? Polanski is the assistant of Professor Abransky, who wants to know more about Dracula. And here you see he is taken by Dracula's gay son, Herbert, who is always after Polanski. And he sees himself in a mirror. But of course, Herbert is not seen in the mirror because he's a Dracula, And my explanation, I mean, this perhaps is a joke, but it reminds you a little bit about the whole thing, is that when you rotate him, he's stuck in the imaginary axis, so he doesn't get to the other side. Okay, that's more a joke, but perhaps that gives you more of an intuition about complex numbers. Okay, we come back to that when we look at the fanfare of Beethoven. Okay, yes, so... Now, I'm not alone with these things. I mean, very famous mathematicians like Yuri Manin, who is really one of the top guys nowadays, he has given an interview in the Notices of the American Mathematical Society in November 2009, and he was asked, so what will happen in the next 20 years in mathematics? And he says very interesting things. He says, instead of sets, clouds of discrete elements, we envisage some sort of vague spaces which can be very severely deformed, so they are elastic, like, elastic balls mapped onto one another, and all that, should be that, while the specific space is not important, but only the space up to deformations. So they will become very geometric, normal, intuitive things. If you really want to return to discrete objects, we see continuous components, the species whose form or even dimension does not matter. And he says, I'm pretty strongly convinced that there is an ontological reversal in the collective consciousness of mathematicians. The right hemispherical and homotopic means, invariant under deformation picture of the world becomes the basic intuition. And if you want to get the discrete set, then you pass to the set of connected components of a space defined only up to homotopy, and so on and so on. So he really kind of anticipates some kind of new foundations of mathematics by a really concrete elastic object, which is a fantastic thing. Yes?
Just the first comment that you made there he made about future mathematics really kind of mirrors, I guess, the only book I've ever read completely was Flow, Gesture, and Space, but it kind of seemed a lot like what he's saying there is a theory that could almost be mapped on an improvisational type level, or a level where it's multiple people, building things.
Yes.
That are all gestural components. I'm sure you're going to be talking about.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to say. Yes.
Yeah, but I found that very strange. He kind of just nailed it exactly like that.
It's incredible, and he's even not alone. Now you can read that there is a book which is called, you can buy the book, which is called Homotopy Type Theory, which is merging foundations of computer science and mathematics into fundamental types which are really elastic. If you want to read the book is very difficult, but it's still a theory, in an embryonal stage. But it's very interesting that we have this shift. Yes.
You said just before Zach asked the question, a really concrete elastic object.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, it's really astonishing what he's saying there, and there is no deeper explanation. The only concrete thing we can tell you is this homotopy type theory, which is a serious attempt of, mathematicians and computer scientists. Yes. So that's the new direction. Okay, so let's come a little bit to gesture philosophy, and don't take me too serious, but I just want to stress, my point of view here. There are origins of gesture philosophy. One is, for sure, Hugues de Saint-Victor. He gives a most adequate definition in Latin, of course. I'm not going to read it in Latin, but you can check it whether it's true. Namely, gesture is the movement and figuration of the body's limbs with an aim, but also according to the measure and modality proper to the achievement of all action and attitude. So what is important, there's a movement, there's a figuration, so it has parts, yes, and it has no defined content. It's just ready to have content. That's extremely important. It's kind of a pre-semiotic object. Yes, it has not a given semantics, and that's very important as a difference to the Anglo-Saxon gesture theory, which Adam Kenton, David O'Neill, perhaps you know them. They have defined the gesture theory where the gestures always have a given meaning. They are just special signs, semiotic objects. But here, for this kind of French approach, the gestures are pre-semiotic things, right? And you see here one very evident, I think a fantastic citation, Tommaso Campanella. He said that omnes proportiones, oh no, I should not read that. Pointing with your finger is the only certitude. So that's the only thing which you're sure is pointing, and that's an elementary gesture, right? So in the internet, when you refer to something, that's exactly this pointing movement. So that's kind of the first thing you have, this pointing thing. Yes, and now coming to the godfather of the French gesture theory, Paul Valéry, in the Palais Chaillot, you can read that dans ces murs voués aux merveilles, j'accueille et garde les ouvrages de la main prodigieuse de l'artiste, égale et rivale de sa pensée, l'une n'est rien sans l'autre. In English, that means, that the thought and the hand are kind of equivalent. Yes, they're kind of. It's not the hand is stupid and following, deep thoughts, but the hand is kind of an equivalent tool. Yes, and he says things which are very similar to that. What I'm going to say in some minutes. He says that it's the rendition of a poem which is the poem. So the poem is only there in its full identity when it is performed. It's the making which is really the substance, not just the abstract score, like in music, the abstract score. No, only when you play it, then its existence is 100%. And he also says that interest in science lies in the art of doing science, how you do it. So it's a very strong stressing of the making. And by the way, these hands are drawings by Valery, which you find in his cahier. Also with a cigarette, of course. And he has been followed by, I only named two of them. Jean Cavaillet, he was shot by the Nazis in 1944. He said that comprendre et attraper le geste et pouvoir continuer. Understanding is catching the gesture and being capable of continuing. So pay attention, it's not just Mickey Mousing, it's not just making the same, but you continue, you see? And understanding is a very elementary thing of, thinking. Merleau-Ponty also says something similar. He says, language is a veritable gesture, and it contains its sense much as the gesture contains its own. This is what makes communication possible. So you see that's very parallel to what Cavaillet said. So this is a French thing, and that's what I'm going to follow. So here, just a last remark. Also in cognitive science, this has been an important thing, the gestural topic. You see, if you take body and environment, then you have its reflection in the homunculus, essentially also through mirror neurons, which are, passive and active at the same time. I think everybody knows about mirror neurons, right? Mirror neuron is, yes?
I was wondering what do you think about Lacan's topology?
Actually, could we go with the questions in the afterwards? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I was just, talking about these two things. You have the body thing, and then, of course, on the other side, you have the cognition. And the big question is how are they connected? Still in the embodied artificial intelligence, this is a big problem. It's not solved, right? And one hypothesis is that the gestures are kind of the missing link. And I have just two names which defend this hypothesis, that essentially mirror neurons and anthropology and cognitive science have the following role. Merlin Donald says that cultural human evolution works via gestural mimesis. So it's kind of something which is a gestural proliferation. Neurologist Vilayanur Ramachandran says the mirror neurons' resonance plays the role in psychology, the role of DNA copying in molecular biology. So there's kind of this gestural copying thing which seemingly is very important to connect the body, the moving body, and the cognition. Okay, that was my short remark, but it's very important in the sense of gestures are pre-semiotic. They're not just following semiotic. Okay, let's go to the theory of music, where I'm more professional. Music transformation theory. I have some four guys who I want to cite who say very interesting things. Manfred Klein says that in Western culture we have devised a singular means of killing music, writing it down in a score. It then has to be resuscitated and resurrected in performance. The performer has to supply all the nuances, the microstructure that was not and could not be notated by the composer in order to bring the music to life. Therein lies his art. And you see here, you hear, of course, Paul Valéry once again, yes. And then here, the godfather of the American music theory, David Lewin, he says, if I am at SS, means, at a certain chord or a certain note, and I wish to get to T, what characteristic gesture should I perform in order to arrive there? This attitude is by and large the attitude of someone inside the music, an idealist dancer and or singer. No external observer, analyst, listener is needed. So this is kind of a complete change of paradigm that understand music means, you move within the music like a dancer. So these are two critiques, but I also have two important persons from the gesture theory of performance. Adorno, who's very well known, I think, he said that already in 46, by the way, correspondingly the task of the interpreter would be to consider the notes until they are transformed into original manuscripts under the insistent eye of the observer. However, not as images of the author's emotion, they are also such, but only accidentally, but as the seismographic curves which the body has left to the music in its gestural vibrations. The idea of performance pertains to the music proper, and it is not accidental. Again, you hear Valerie. Performing music, making music. This is what he writes. So I think it's extremely important, yes, that kind of we have this transition. And Robert Hatton, who teaches at Indiana, he said something very simple and very true. Given the importance of gesture to interpretation, why do we not have a comprehensive theory of gesture in music? Now, the answer is very simple. It's very difficult. It's too difficult. You need a lot of topology. You need a lot of differential geometry, of algebraic topology, horrible things to understand these gestures, yes? So their nature is more complex than the abstract harmony or things like that. Okay, here I give you now a precise definition of what is a gesture, and I hope you pardon me for this formula, but I'll give a very intuitive geometric representation. I take a oriented graph, so a number of vertices and arrows, and I take a set of curves, these red curves, in a certain space, like, time, position, pitch, kind of a musical space here. And the left is what I call a skeleton, and the thing to the right is what I call a body. And what is the relation G is that, for every arrow here, you have a corresponding arrow here, which is a real continuous curve. You see here, this loop goes to this loop here. This arrow goes to this arrow here. And these two parallel ones go to this one here and the other one here. And then this one here goes to this one. So it's a representation in a topological space of an abstract graph. That's what I call a gesture. Let's make a small example. It's easy to talk about gestures, like talking about time. But when somebody asks you, what is time, and the gesture is a little bit similar, so I try to make a precise mathematical definition like this. Okay, so take the tip space. You have your finger, and the pianist goes down and stays down and goes up. So you have three parts of the movement here. This is the articulation, go down, stay down a certain time, go up. So, okay, now you are very unhappy because you think this is so meager, so thin, you cannot make really nice bodies. So what about the real bodies? Now, there is a fantastic small fact, namely that if I take all the gestures which have a given skeleton and a given space, their whole set is a topological space. So you can consider them as being points in a higher space, and now you can move around those spaces. So you can make gestures of gestures, yes? And that is what I call hypergestures. Let's make an example. Space-time, okay, I start with, a loop, and then I make a tripod of loops, and then I move that in time. What comes out is what I have written in Mathematica here, a moving tripod, like an ET or something like that, You see this line of circles, yes? You have 3 lines of circles, and they move in time. So this is a hyper gesture, and it shows you that you can, of course, model very concrete objects like, bodies and things like that, okay? So that are hyper gestures. Yes, let's look at an example from music. The fanfare of Beethoven's Opus 106, Just understand the rhythm. I take those onsets and durations. You see, you have this kind of 4 units here. So you have 1/8 duration for the first note and 3/8 for the second, and so on. You have these kind of 8 notes, kind of time events. And you see now what's happening is the following, is that you have a halting gesture, yes, ba-ba, yes, fast, slow, and you repeat that, right? So you have a repetition of the halting gesture here, okay? What do you have in the second part? You have a repetition, ba-ba, and then you hold the repetition, right? So what you have is kind of a symmetry. You replace a repetition of a halting into a halting of a repetition, yes? That's kind of a funny small fact. Now let's make a gestural interpretation of that. And I come back to my Polanski idea of the complex numbers here. I have these hypergestures which deforms this halting first into the second. Now I make a vertical, I leave it, and I get a reflected one here. And then I move it down to the second one. So you see, it's a hypergesture of a hypergesture. And I think that could be called Lewin's characteristic gesture. So it's a gestural interpretation of that short fanfare, okay? Just as a first example. Of course, there are many other examples. I also have here a very interesting example of Jocelyn Hood. She's sitting there. She's a young Steinway pianist, and she has analyzed this piece of Takemitsu with the gestural language. And I think that is an expression of really deeply understanding what you have to do when you play. And I think it would be fantastic to hear her, how she explains these things. She's also co-author of that gesture book. But I think these gestures are getting more and more important to describe complex facts in music. Okay, so let's go to the modulation, which I showed you before with these symmetries, you know, and with the symmetric objects here. And let's look at the modulation in 1/4 relation, so from C major to F major, for example. So what I used there in that theory when I made it, it was just a reflection in the pitch class set. So, you know, we had triads, and they were just inverted to other triads, the classical operations. Now, if you go over to gestures, you have to forget about that, and you have to move continuously, yes? So let's make a modulation theory, and I made it as follows. I took just the symmetry of C major. You know, the symmetry of C major is the reflection at D. Yes, you have the symmetric structure here, and I created just a vector field, a field of movements for C major. The same for F major, and I took the Lie bracket, which is a standard mathematical concept, and I got kind of a vector field which looks very funny and much more complicated than the starting points here. And if I put the 12 pitch classes there, I see something very interesting. I see if I take now all the 12 pitch classes, they are contained in 3 integral curves. So curves defined by these vector fields, you know, the brown, the blue, and the green one. And if I take now the 7th here, that's kind of, you know, a gesture composed of 3 lines. The 7th of C and the 7th of F is that one. Now I can move one into the other in a gestural way, in the sense that I move B to A sharp, I move F to E, and I move D to G on such integral curves. And that's the model which gives me exactly the same results as the old symmetric model, but it uses elastic gestures, yes? Okay, let's go a little bit to gestural creativity, because I think that's extremely important, you know, for creating new things, to getting away from these facts. I mean, when you make facts, you are creative, so you are living somewhere else, not only in the factual, but in the, you know, in the industrial plant. So, of course, a very famous citation would be that from Free Jazz, Ornette Coleman's LP, where he says, let's try to play the music and not the background. It doesn't mean only that I don't want to play in bars where, you know, we are the background for the whiskey drinking, but he just says, I really want to make the music itself and not just copy something which is already given. So in free jazz, they do not play the music like a written theater play, but they play with it like a game, where the rules are constantly generated or recycled. They make it and bring it to birth, shaping the body of time at any moment. So it's a much more creative thing in the sense that they have the full responsibility of what they're doing. Let me give an example of such a guy here, Cecil Taylor, who says that the pianist, I hope some of you know him, he just got the Kyoto Prize last year, which is the second highest prize after the Nobel Prize. He says that the body is no way supposed to get involved in Western music. I mean, this is his statement, yes. I think it's some kind of true. And he says, for me, the most important is, I try to imitate on the piano the leaps in space a dancer makes. So he's not copying a score. He generates the music through these movements. There is no score which he realizes. It just starts from scratch, from the gestures, yes? So that's kind of this gestural creativity. And, of course, the French here should also know Marcel Marceau, who said something very interesting. As a dancer, dans le vide de l'espace, quelqu'un dessine, crée à travers son corps l'infini du temps. Les mains bavardent, le buste s'exalte, le regard s'illumine et la scène se remplit petit à petit, petit à petit, le geste devient forme. So you see the gesture is kind of the original thing, and at the end it becomes form. And also he creates the time, the infinity of time through his body. So the time is not just there, out there, but he makes the time, which is an extremely important statement. Yes. And of course, you have the other one who is also very significant as a gestural artist, Jackson Pollock. He, with his actions, makes the music, his music without illustrating any outside object. Yes. So I think these are examples, for classical examples of gestural creativity. And I also want to play you something I have made myself. It was a recording at the UNAM, at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, in October 2000, where I could play on a beautiful Bösdorfer Imperial. And it was just to show you a short thing, which I played. I had my drummer Heinz Geiser with me. A short, very gestural part here. I think it's just 1 minute. Go away. So in summary, we have now these 3 levels, yes? Musical facts, notes, chords. The second level would be processes, transformational relations with, these graphs here. And then on the third, we have the gestural diagrams. And of course, we can look at transitions, yes? You poetize, you take, an input from a fact, and you produce an output. You go finalize up and down here. And then you can also make gestures and, formalize them into diagrams. Or vice versa, you can take diagrams and realize them as gestures, yes? And this sounds very kind of, theoretical, of course, but I think what is important is that this whole thing, which I would call melting facticity by creative processes and gestures, can really be realized on the software level. And I think that's important to get away from just, talking about things. And we have realized that in the Rubato software with just these 3 levels. Yes, it implements the 3 levels. And of course, responsible for this is my PhD student, Florian Thalmann, who is just finishing his PhD now at my university. And let me see if I can make you some simple examples here. So you have already seen that one. Yeah, this is the starting of the Hammerklavier again. Just play it. You see already to the left, you see a graph, and this graph is exactly the process, yes? Here was the starting, but nothing was in it, and then I loaded this music, so the input produced this one, yes? And you will see always the whole process history will be traced here, right? You see it. So let's make something let's play it again, and let's make, I don't know, let's just select it and make a horizontal reflection. See here the reflection is just the next step which you have in the process graph, right? Of course, I can add another reflection, a vertical one. Now you have the retrograde inversion of the whole thing. Of course, it could be that you're not very happy, and you go back here to that original situation, and you make something else, yes? Perhaps you want to rotate it, yes? make a rotation. You see, this is also this functorial point of view that you can add new perspectives which you didn't expect. So let's make a kind of, let's play it, and then just I make a rotation around this point here. Make a rotation here. So on, I can do all horrible things. You know, I can shear it. But so you understand what's happening here? That it's that you're just free, you know, to generate different futures. Yes, the unicity is gone here, and you also control this process. It's not just that you can think of it, but you can intervene. You can go back into your history. If you don't like your grandmother's genes, you know, because you have a strange nose, you go back to your grandmother and change the genes, and you will have another nose after that, yes? So that's kind of what it's a complete control on this level, right? Of course, you can also do horrible things. You can also deform things in a continuous way. Let's see whether it works now. I have 2 points here. Let's go to the MIDI here. I played after, huh? Alteration, I just take a first piece, that's my piece here, and then I take the second one, which will be a traction force, yes, and I think I can now deform it. No. Oh, I have to say what I deform, sorry. I deform time and pitch. So you see, you can make this one here with Beethoven. Want to hear it? Now, of course, you can create very horrible things now, you know, but of course, not all perspectives are really the good ones here. You can really play Cecil Taylor here. What is really important is that you have complete control over this kind of things which you are kind of deforming. Yes, this is very gestural. Let's make a last example here of this thing. Let's go. I have to reload it for a certain reason. Now I go and use this leap motion. Ever heard about leap motion? This is this hardware part here, which has 2 small cameras, and I want to make music using now gestures directly, yes? Now let's go and take the space here of spectrum. Okay. Now, I think I can play it now. Let's play it here. Okay. You see, I can move my fingers, and it transforms it directly to music, yes? So I have my gesture here. I say I freeze it here. Now it's frozen. Now I make a wallpaper out of it by translating it, you know. See, and I can also rotate it. You see? Now I think I can make more copies in that I go here, make more copies here. Okay, but I also can go back to the beginning here, yes? What happens here, now I activate the beginning. What does it mean? It means that when I go now again to my thing, then I generate the same thing, but with other input, you see? I change the genes. You see? I mean, this is realizing this gestural thing, really, I think, and our composition students like it very much. They're creating crazy things now with that. Of course, it's still in the experimental stage, but you see what is its implication, yes? Okay. Let's go back to this thing here, right? Theory. Yes. Okay, now I'm playing the game of physics now also. I think there are deep reasons for that. I start with something strange, which is most of you might know that Escher, yes? Escher, he makes very strange things. You know, the right part is you look from below, and the left part you see it from above, and they are glued together in a middle strip, which is neutral with respect to is it from below. So you can glue these things together. So you can flip, you know, up and down here. So that's why I called the theorem, which I have the Escher theorem. Yes. Oh, I thought you wanted. Oh, sorry. Yes, you have the following situation. If you take a hypergesture, which is made by a sequence of digraphs, I mean, you know, this skeleton for defining hypergestures, then you can, of course, create in a space that the hypergestures which start with gamma n and then gamma n minus 1 in that sequence. But you can also start in a different way if you take a permutation of those things, you know. Then you can, of course, also start with the permuted ones. And the theorem tells you that they are essentially the same. They're corresponding to each other in a very precise way. Now, instead of making this theory, I want to show you a very simple example where everybody can follow. You have this tube here, yes? Now, how can you construct it? You can start from a line and then make a circle of lines, yes? You see? And you get the tube. Okay? But you can also start with a circle and then make a line of circles, yes? And you get the same thing. That's exactly what the theorem means. It means that, you know, two constructions which are, by permuting the roles here, get the same result. Now, this is a very simple musical fact. If you look at counterpoint, you know, where you have, just in the first species, you have two voices which are simultaneously played, and you can construct that in two ways. Either you start by the cantus firmus, which is the lower melody here, yes, this melody here, and you deform it to the discantus, so you have a vertical deformation, right? Or else you can start with the first interval and then deform everything horizontally. So interval to interval to interval. So these are the 2 points of view, yes, in counterpoint. And usually they teach you that the left thing is what happens in the word of counter, of, you know, point against point. But that's rather nonsense because you have only consonances there. And the whole tension which comes is just, you know, moving from left to right, the tension of the successive intervals. But anyway, the result is the same. Yes. So this is what physicists call the world sheet, this kind of sheet thing. And then I want to give a very, 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 very short presentation of string theory. Yeah? In physics, you know, you have a matter, and you look at molecules. And then every molecule is made of atoms, and every atom has a nucleus, which contains, you know, the positive proton and the neutral neutron, which glues together the protons. And then there are spinning electrons around that. And if you go now into that neutron, for example, it's made out of quarks, which are still smaller things. And if you go into a quark, they are made out of strings. This is kind of the new theory of physics. So the strings are very small strings, and they can be either closed, like these blue ones here, or they can be open. But when they are open, they are attached to so-called branes, like surfaces. Okay. Now, there is a very interesting theory in the string theory, which is called S-duality. S means strong, which exchanges now particles and d-branes, and I'll show you how that works. By the way, this book is really fantastic, Hashimoto. It's really simple to read, practically no formulas, and it gives you a very interesting point of view of this new physics. So he takes this example where you have a d-brane. D stands for Dirichlet, that doesn't matter here. And you have a parallel one. And now he takes this world sheet, and he says this can be constructed in two ways. The first way is just, you know, you have an open string, and you let it rotate around the axis, and then you get, of course, this sheet here. But you can also do it another way. You can take these circles and move the circles from left to right. So that's what you get is a graviton, which is a force particle for gravitation. So the d-branes are kind of attracted to each other by gravitation, and this happens by an exchange of such gravitons. Now, if you think that these d-branes are small things and you don't have to care, I have a wonderful graphic from New York Times here, which shows that, you know, our universe could be one brane. And then we have other universes which are other branes, and you have an exchange of these gravitation forces between the different universes. So it's not true that the universe is made of small branes, but they could be huge. And you see again this multiverse thing here. Now megaverse, it's called megaverse. There are different universes, different sheets of reality. Now, this is exactly what also happens in my music theory, you know. This movement of the point here, these are kind of open strings, yes, and they are moved so that the endpoints are moved on this, you know, on these lines. So these integral core curves here of these fields play the role of branes, you know. It's like where the interval has to move. And the only condition of the model is that if you have an interval and you move it to another interval, then in the intermediate situation should never be such that the interval, which is an open string, becomes a closed one. That's the only condition I have here in this whole theory of music, but it's a very physical condition. So you see this kind of very parallel situation. So what we have in this glass bead game now is a gesture theory and string theory comparison, yes? We have the Escher theorem, flipping hypergestures. We have duality, strings, and D-branes. And of course, hypergestures correspond to worldsheets. So let's make a summary here. Yes, if you have the music gesture theory, you have hypergestures, you have the Escher theorem, you have works. And now I have to make a remark here. Works, I say it's 2 times roughly 10 to the 36, so 1 with 36 zeros, 72 element motif. So motifs like, you know, a melodic motif which has 72 notes. This is not very small, but it's kind of compared to a sonata or a symphony. It's nothing. A symphony has 100,000 notes. So you can imagine how many symphonies are possible, yes? It's kind of, I don't know, 10 to the, I don't know, 500, 600, I don't know, extremely high. And of course, you have a communication via gestural interaction. That's what I showed here. Now, in physics, you have a very similar situation. You have string theory. You have strings and branes. Yes. You have the duality instead of the Escher theorem. You have universes, and they have calculated that you have roughly 10 to the 450 string theory landscapes, so basic vacuum conditions for string theories, for worlds, yes. So it's kind of, you know, we have a lot of musical works, we have a lot of physical works, yes. And you have variable laws, of course, in physics then also, and an interaction via exchange of bosonic strings. So it's exactly the same thing to the left and to the right. Yeah. So let's come to the end of the whole story, playing the game in a pre-semiotic ontology. So I think what we had now, you know, was this ontology with the gestures and everything. Now if you just go to the gestures, something strange happens, you know, the whole semiotic part melts away. And I have two, again, French philosophers, Charles Aloni, a good friend of mine, very crazy guy, by the way. He says that it is not, I only read it in English, huh? It is not the rule that governs the diagrammatic action, but the action that causes a rule to emerge. So for him, diagrammatic action means gestural action. That's kind of in the French language. But what is important is that by this action, you don't follow a rule, but you make the rule. You know, it's kind of a machine that makes rules, that makes, you know, hard facts. And Châtelet also says that the gesture is not substantial. It has no substance. It's not kind of an object there. It gains amplitude by determining itself. The gesture inaugurates a progeny of gestures, whereas the rule only enunciates instructions, a protocol for decomposing the action into endless repeatable acts. This is a little bit very, very French philosophy wording, but I think it tells you very clearly that it is about a pre-semiotic situation here. So the gestural level of ontology gets rid of the whole, you know, semiotic part. Okay, let's make a summary of that. I would say that the pre-semiotic ontology of gestures, which generates these things, is not an auxiliary preliminary level to the real factual existence. It's simultaneously present. So, you know, the making is always there. It's not only about facts. By these things, I'm not saying that the facts are not important. They are there. But we enrich, yes, the facts by kind of, you know, the machines which make them, which are by definition pre-semiotic. You know, you cannot generate, else you would have kind of a circle. Perhaps that's also possible, but I think it's not so probable. And it is the level of the creative action and making in art and science. I think that's extremely important that I say in art and science, they have exactly the same principles when they are creative. In mathematics, in physics, or when you create whatever. Yes. So I think that's kind of putting them on the same level. I would say that Hesse's game paradigm changes now in this sense that the game plays with rules and not following them. So the rules are kind of part of the game. You can make rules, you can abolish them, you can create new ones, you can have to negotiate, but the rules are no longer fixed forever. And the game's conceptual framework is not a given space. You see, I've seen in the music examples, I had different spaces. Once I took only, the spectrum, then I took the pitch and all these things. So you can change the spaces. But the space is remodeled according to actual creative extensions. Yes, you make new spaces. And the third one is something about unicity, and I have some pictures here. The unicity of the game's outcome is suspended. What doesn't mean that the unicity is, that the outcome is not important, but it's just no longer one single outcome. And it is a sequence of suspensions which we have, the geocentricity by Copernicus, the world, our Earth is no longer the center. Of course, it's still there, at least today, yes. It's still there, but it's no longer the center of the world. And anthropocentricity, yes, the human is no longer the only thing. We have, this ramification, configuration of the biological development, but we are not the only ones, and perhaps not the last ones. We'll see. The chronocentricity, also very deep change, that the time is no longer a unique time. Before Einstein, you had just a Newtonian time, which was just God's given time for everybody. And now you have, for every inertial system, you have its time, and then the transformations between the times are described by the Lorentz group. And you have also what I would call the ratiocentricity. Yes, Alan Turing has shown that even machines can make rational things. I'm not saying they can think, but they can make rational things even faster than we can very often. So yeah, after this sequence, I would think of a possibility to consider the end of the factocentricity, which means that the facts are the center. Yes, that kind of we add now to the facts these other layers of processes and gestures as equivalent kind of topics in the whole construction. Yes, I would consider several tools or techniques in such a pre-semiotic laboratory. I would think that, I don't know, physicists might appreciate that and the others not so much. Variational action principles with Lagrangian cohomology. In physics, the laws like Newtonian law, yes, the first, second, whatever, they are not the first step of making physics. The first step, you are kind of in a metaphysical thing. You have a strange Lagrangian function. You make integrals, you make variations, which is not physical. And you get kind of optimal solutions, and the optimal solutions then are the physical laws. So you're working in a pre-physical, creational level, and I think that's extremely important. So that's what I'm talking about here. Perhaps you know about Roman Jacobson's poetic functions, which define poetic contents by correspondences on the level of the syntax, which are, mapping kind of, associative concepts into their position in the language or in the system you have. And then also creativity theoretical processes of semiotic extensions. There is a whole theory of creativity, where you extend the meaning by certain techniques. And I would also add the gestural thought experiments following Châtelet. Thought experiments are extremely important, to make kind of this extension of things without having a reality as facts. Okay, so I think what we really need, and that's my final paper here, is a large hadron collider for thought experiments. I think we have it for for protons, for neutrons, things like that. But I think we should also have one for thought experiments. Yes, without killing each other. I mean, it's not about war. It's about having a systematic environment for this collaboration, which experiments on this of creation. I think I'm done. Thank you.
From last week, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the audience. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Guerino, for your conference and this beautiful PowerPoint. I just one question about the ontology of gestures. I think reading Châtelet that there is this thing in Châtelet where you never know where a gesture really starts. That you never know what the difference is between an action, a pure action, or even a pure natural process, and a gesture. I think he speaks of proto-gestures even in the constitution of the membrane, in the living membrane. There is a proto-gestures there, proto-gesture, and so it seems that the risk with this ontology of gesture is to put intentionality back in different processes. And I just wanted to know how you would react on this question.
First of all, I would agree that he has not given a precise definition of the concept of a gesture. I don't know what reasons he had. I mean, he was a mathematician, but perhaps he was thinking in a more global way. And the other thing is that in fact, intentionality is something very dangerous in the sense of Adam Kent and David McNeill, that you're kind of addicted to meaning. You cannot believe that you do things without having a meaning. This is kind of an addiction. Everybody thinks everything has a meaning. That's why so many people are religious, because they think there must be something. I cannot just be here without any meaning. Die away without any meaning. But if you ask a squirrel, perhaps, it would not give you a big answer about what's the meaning, Does that, I think this is a danger, yes?
Yeah, so it's just the status of the intention in your theory of gesture, and also can a gesture does it have to be embodied necessarily, that is, carried by intentions, or can it sometimes?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't think the body is the intention. I think that the gesture is really like, like Merleau-Ponty also said about the language. The language is not the container of the thought. It's the body of the thought. So it's not kind of something external which contains something else internal. And I think this is this fixed idea which we always had, There must be some spirit within the body, because otherwise the whole Christian thing would not work, whatever.
Yeah, thank you very much, Guerino. I have a related question to the one Fabian just asked. Is at the end you talked about Turing and about the difference between rationality and thinking.
Yes.
Is it like this distinction you make? Is it like the same? Is it for the same reason? Meaning that, like the answer you just gave, is it like giving away intentionality? Or what do you do with intentionality there, and what do you do with gestures there?
I think I think that the answer is in the same range, that I don't believe that a machine can simulate semiotics, meaning. There are famous games, but I think creation of meaning is something which is very specific to our species. So that's why I said ratio and not thinking.
And in relation to gestures, then, to what you just said about like the fact that gesture was not necessarily related to meaning, if I understood you well. Yeah.
So the gestures which are containing a meaning are called tamed gestures. The French call them tamed gestures. They are tamed. They are kind of serving a given transportation of a given meaning already. Like this gesture here. This is a tamed one. For Italians, this one, right? But the gestures by themselves are a priori not yet loaded with meaning or intentionality or whatever contents, yes? They are not signs. I mean, this is the French position, and I think that's what I'm following here, yes?
Thank you.
Wait.
If meaning is specific to Homo sapiens, excuse me, folks, then how is ratiocentrism any different than anthropocentrism?
it is completely different category. I mean, anthropocentrism was a biological category. Ratiocentrism was a symbolic category, yes, of rational actions like counting of things. And in biology, squirrels are not counting very much usually. So I mean, it's another reality, right?
Well, yeah.
It's the difference between Darwin and
From a symbolic perspective, yes.
No, from any perspective. I mean, from understanding of these concepts, yes. The concept of biology is definitely another one of that, of counting and making rational, I don't know, syllogism or whatever symbolic things.
So that's why the gesture. That's why the gesture. Thank you, is not embodied originally, or sort of aboriginally.
Aboriginal. Yes, it is. I mean, in my definition, I had an embodiment, yes, because I have this, this formal graphical thing, and I have the mapping of these formal arrows into a space, which I called a topological category for serious reasons, where then the body is these curves, yes. And so that's in the definition. Now, that body can be a physical body, just movement of hands and things like that. But it can also be, like I showed you in the Beethoven example, it can be a movement in a musical parameter space, which is not body in the physical sense. Yeah, so I'm not specific on the type of body.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, basically, with the idea of gesture, I'm kind of working on a similar type thing, or something that deals with gesture as well. But as far as like gesture when playing improvised musics, it seems as when people talking about it, it always constitutes, if not a movement, at least an action. Now, I know you play improvised music yourself, so there's certain times that are like almost not a movement or an action that are still gestural that happen in the improvisational topos. I don't know how to really put it into words.
No, you're right. I mean, let's take the example. Like Miles Davis and John Coltrane, they're very, very opposed to each other.
Sure.
Miles Davis insists that sometimes he doesn't play and he comes back, after a certain number of seconds, while John Coltrane always is explicitly playing all those things, right?
Right.
The truth is that, of course, Miles Davis also plays them, but he plays them in his head, subcutaneous, and he comes back, after a certain. So that's kind of going into another reality. But I think the gestures are there, but they are going somewhere else.
Right, because I was starting to think about it like, well, there's these gestures that are not tied to action or movement, but I guess you could always kind of go back to like, well, it ends up causing movement or action, or it ends up that it was influenced by a movement or action I'm talking about in an active improvisation, I guess. So that's where it was getting more confusing to me, but I don't know. It was nice to hear that you kind of can see that there's gestures that are a little bit more indescribable like that. I don't know. It's kind of it's a gray area.
I mean, what you need is a concept of the artistic presence. Yes, what is the space of the artistic presence? And I have a whole theory about that.
Sure.
You're moving in a space, which is spanned by gestures, but also by the planning and then the going back and forth. The thinking of the past, thinking of the future. But also the interaction with the instrument, which is an interface between the sound and your body.
Sure.
So that whole space which defines the artistic presence, which is extremely important. And I think in that space is where things happen.
I had another just almost like straight up question as well. Do you think the microgestural in music can change the microgestural in like daily physical movement of the person? For example, like when you were talking about like experiencing the music as a dancer. Like, I would like to think that certain improvisations, or even like improvisational music, or even a lot of music post 1960s, instead of the musicians thinking about sound, often they're thinking through sound, or just thinking sound as they create it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's no like conceptualization of what they're going to do at all.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But like, I mean, for example, I guess I'm thinking more towards what would be considered, you know, electronic music from the last 20 or 30 years. But for example, I mean, I know a lot of DJs and producers would, you know, actively not really like the way that, you know, certain, you know, clubs or whatever were going. So they would sort of change micro gestures in the sound that would somewhat kind of micro gesturally change the atmosphere. So, I mean, yeah, there's this weird effect with that, but how did I want to link this to free jazz more specifically?
No, I mean, the link is clear when you said, you know, they are playing inside the sounds and not thinking about the sounds as objects down there.
Sure,
But
sure.
they are just, you know, this is the essence of the thought experiment. You know, you become an electron, you become a photon, you are
Exactly, like
embodying that thing, and you understand it
when
only
Einstein
by,
talks about
you know,
becoming the photon,
like
exactly,
Marcel Marceau, I think he said, in order to understand the water, you have to become a fish or so. I mean, you know, in that sense, you have to embody it, yes?
Sure.
Yeah, you're right. Mm.
I'm wondering about the term gesture. I can see the formalization of the functor is multidimensional. It doesn't have dimensional restriction. But even in your last answer and throughout the talk, it seems to me gesture might be an over-constraining term because it's about corporeality. And I don't see anything in the description of the functor which is necessarily corporeal. Right. So
the functor is not corporeal.
No, that's what I'm
yet.
saying. No, exactly. I'm saying the functor is multidimensional. It's abstract.
Yes.
There's nothing in the mathematical formulations which describes dimensionality. Right. It can be any dimension. It's not constrained dimensionally.
No, not at all.
But gesture, as you presented it, seems corporeally constituted or corporeally based.
Yes.
These might be some of the questions that were earlier. So it just seems, I wonder whether gesture is seems a kind of constrained form of the functor.
No, it's not. It makes this functor more explicit. I mean, you can prove that you can transform any functor into gesture.
So, but is the gesture a subcategory of a functor? Because of the, I mean, the corporeality gives you.
I mean, it's. I can answer in the sense that, you know, the functors are just working on any category, whatever that means, mathematical categories, yes, with arrows which you can compose, whereas gestures are working in topological categories, right? So categories which are also topological spaces. Now, what is more general? Well, you can show that every category is, of course, a topological category. Yes, by giving it indiscrete topology, for example. So every category is a special case of a topological category, right? So, yes.
So is the gesture a
generalization?
Is a generalization?
A generalization of the functor, yes.
Okay.
The gestural point of view is more general than the abstract point of view.
I think what's at the core of my concern is the, in a way, the kind of corporeality of the gesture, yes, which you've emphasized through performance and music and the examples. And I don't see anything at all corporeal in the general account of the functor. So I can't sort of translate between.
Yeah, I understand you. I mean, you know, if you do mathematics, sometimes you make strange things. Topology is, what is topology? You know, this is what mathematicians have dealt with, and the topology can be more or less pathological or more or less normal. You know, the normal topology, the neighborhood of our three space, is something everybody understands. But then there are topologies which are still, you know, examples of that concept, yes, but they are completely kind of pathological. They have very strange behaviors, yes. But it turns out that even the strangest topologies are very important, like in algebraic geometry, for example, the so-called Zariski topology, which seems something very strange, you know, because you cannot separate points. They have always neighborhoods which intersect, which is absurd in the normal topology. But they are very useful. They're kind of central. So, you know, you generalize a concept, and it gives you very interesting new insights. So you have to generalize or rethink your concept of a corporeality. That's what we are. We are told that. You know, we have to.
Hi, talking about topologies. Reiterating my question. Have you been using any of Lacan's topological models or thinking? Because he basically unfolds act into topology.
What kind of topology is he using?
Well, he's using topology of the Mobius strip that you had through your presentation. He's using Kleinian bottle. He's using three-dimensional.
Yeah, I mean, this is standard stuff that I'm using also, for example, in the, when you look at the triads of a normal scale, the C major scale, you look at the triads, yes, the first, second, the 7 triads, right? The normal, like this one, and you look at their intersections, yes. Some of those intersect, some don't. The first and the second don't intersect. The first and the third intersect. So you draw lines for all those pairs which intersect, right? Okay, second, you look at triples of such triads, yes, which intersect. Like the third, the first, and the fifth, they intersect. So you draw a triangular surface as soon as 3 intersect. And what you get, if you connect that, you get a Möbius strip. Yes, so this is a classical thing of algebraic topology used in music theory. And Klein bottles something you get easily also with similar considerations. So all these objects are absolutely standard in any kind of, I would say, serious topological constraints, But I don't know what Lacan really makes with the homology of these things. I don't know whether he understands what is homology of such things. I don't believe he does. Yeah. Psychological consequences of homology being one and so on. No. I don't know anything. Perhaps you know more.
You talk about the breakdown of uniqueness principles with examples such as Copernicus and Darwin. What about similar kind of decenterings within musical practice? What events do you see as seminal for the irreversible expansion of musical composition? And what do you envisage as being as happening after the end of factocentricity?
Music. Well, there are 2 things which are happening. The first is just, that the kind of the unicity of the ideal style, which is the Western tradition, yes, which we are taught in our schools of music, yes, Mozart, and once again Mozart, and, also like Schenker starts with Bach and ends with Brahms, and there's nothing after that, just kind of... Yeah, and all that stuff. I mean, it's full of those small rules, yes. And I think we have broken them up hugely. I mean, with spectral music, but also with other ethnical musics, like Indonesian music or Hindustani music. That's one thing which I think is more the functorial point of view. But it's still not a present fact in the schools of music. Yes, we still have this strong dominance of European tradition. Okay. But the other thing is, I think the passage to the gestural thing is that we understand more and more that music is not just about scores. It's not about this, deep frozen pizzas. Yes. Sometimes I said to myself, I just should make a talk, yes, distributing deep frozen pizzas and have people eat them and say, this is what you get if you look at the score without performance. Yes. And it's true. I mean, you can make the example if you take a software and you play a beautiful, children's scene by Schumann, like it is written, really, literally what is written there, it sounds horrible. It really sounds horrible. You have to transform, you have to heat up the pizza, and what they said here, yes, you have to transform it back to a gesture, right? Otherwise, it's just nothing. And this is kind of becoming more and more a knowledge that people, admit that the performance is an essential part of the composition. It's not just cooking and kind of serving a given dish, but you complete the identity of the music when you. So these dimensions are essential coming. I don't know whether that answers your question.
I have another question. Maybe does it work? Yeah? A bit technical, but about the hypergesture.
Yes.
I'd like to go back on this, and because it seems that in the examples that you gave, there's always some kind of continuity of possible sliding between gestures.
Yes.
And what happens when gestures open radically incompatible topoi, let's say, and how do you operate transfers between incompatible gestures? I think from my understanding of sheaf theory, a sheaf is tracking compatible regions between gestures and trying to reconstruct a morphism, right? That's if I understand right. It seemed, but maybe I got it wrong, that from the examples which were musical examples that you gave, there wasn't this incompatibility, this kind of discontinuous cuts between gestures and trying to transfer between them. So how do you envisage that?
Well, one thing is that, of course, even if the skeleton is the same of two gestures, it can be that one realization, one body, yes, associated with the same skeleton is completely degenerate. So, all the points are kind of staying fixed. So things look very different, but they stem from the same thing. So that would be one answer, that you can look at degeneration of gestures, yes? And the other is, I think, I now forgot the experiment, because you can perhaps help me. There has been an experiment with, spatial rotation or spatial movement, and people had to recognize whether two shapes were a transformation from one another. What was the name? I forgot. Shepherd, yes, shepherd rotation. And they wanted to find out how are people really comparing different positions, and you have continuous thing, nothing. You just give people two things, and they have to decide. And they found out that the time you need to decide whether they are kind of copies of the same thing is a function of the angles. So the larger the angle, the longer they take. And the conclusion was that what we do mentally, we rotate them. We just we connect them by kind of a fictitious gesture, yes. So that in many cases, the kind of discrete things are kind of completed by an imaginary gesture, yes. And that's one of the problems of contemporary, not contemporary, whatever, electronic music, yes, that they have no gesture there. So you kind of, not all, but very often. I have been to the ICMC, the International Computer Music Conference, for many years, and had always been the same, yes. You have these compositions which are shown there, and you go somewhere, and then there is kind of a machine in front, and there's some guy pushes a CD or whatever. And then you have these 8 loudspeakers which make boom, boom, this ping-pong music,
Now, you're referring more to electronic composition as opposed to electronic dance music, though.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But of course, it's a big mystery, and I think Valerie said that. It's one of the mysteries of music, that it can transform discrete things into continuous things. And I think, the gag there is really that you can imagine a gesture connecting these kind of, it's like you have the steps of a dancer, when the dancer touches the floor, that's the notes, that's the score. But when you dance, when you're in the air, you don't see that, And I think what you have is to complete those steps, those traces, and it's very important when you play the piano. It's important how you move, because what comes down is a function of how you move, right? If you move in the wrong way, you will play shit, So what is not visible is very important, how you move around, I think Jocelyn can confirm that the movement of the whole movement is extremely important to generate a good performance.
My question relates to what you just said, is if gesture is an expression of the music and the movement in the music, then can the movement in the music be the expression of the gesture? And I'm wondering how you see the relationship between gesture as the expression or gesture as the modality of expression, and what your overall feeling is on gesture, what we're supposed to take away from today.
Well, the overall thing we should take away is that there is a life before meaning. There's a life before. Meaning is not just given, but you can make it. In order to make it, you have to live somewhere else, When you look at the dancer or so, I think most of the gestures that are not loaded by a given meaning. At least I don't need that. So I think you just think about living without gestures, which always have to be tamed and meaning something, You generate meaning. I'm not saying it's disjoint, but you very often generate meaning by, kind of a harmony of gestures, yes?
Would you see the same thing in the gestures So in the computer software, when you're permuting your compositions and running them along different axes, would you see the gestures correspond to the same movements in the music? If you're transforming the music and it moves up instead of down, if there's a descalation, would you see that correspond in the gesture, and you think that the gestures correspond in meaning as well to the movement of the music?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you have performed that gesture, say, of a reflection where the up goes down, you change the direction, then of course, as a result, you have another composition, which then is another fact. It's made differently. It's a fact, yes. But it's not identical to how it was made, I think if you forget about the movement which connects these things, yes, then you are lost in space. So I think you have to, if you want to understand more than just the result, if you want to connect it to the first version, then you have to think about how they are related, and then you go to the gesture. Right? This is for, let me just make an example. If you look at retrograde, retrograde means playing a piece of music time backwards, yes? And that's a very classical technique in composition, that you take a melody and then you take its retrograde, right? But it's very seldom that you recognize that it is a retrograde. It's just another shape. Now, what is, to me, very important is to kind of make it evident that these things are related. Not just making them, but also make evident how you did them, And Beethoven was very strong in making evident the movements which connect two things. I think that's extremely important, and differentiates bad from good composition also, Spitting out isolated facts is just nothing, to my mind.
You were talking about Jakobsen earlier, and I was thinking...
Jacobson?
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, Roman Jakobsen.
Yes.
I was thinking back to like Zaum poetry, or someone like Klebnikov, or even Shelley, who basically were trying to make the score, as you put it, kind of like a hot score in a way. Would you consider that kind of like a fool's mission, or because in Shelley it kind of collapses into this demonic emptiness, kind of like with an Ab-X painter or something like that.
I don't know Shelley. I cannot answer because
okay.
I don't know him. Sorry.
Well, I guess like in the materiality of the signifier, he tries to find this kind of dynamic moment that you were describing. Or like when Valéry describes Attika, the dancer, in his dialogues, he says that, in the performance, the kind of is what it is of the kind of material body gets, the dancer kind of goes a little bit beyond that, or kind of creates like a buzz kind of beyond that or something. So, would you consider the possibility of a notational score that kind of has that dynamic moment embedded within it?
Yeah, I think if you look at poems, the rhyme poem is like a score. It's written down, and it creates its meaning by objects like God and corrupt. Put them at the end of two rhymes. Yes. Then you position them syntactically in positions which correspond to each other, like by this transitional symmetry. So then you give them, an added value, an added meaning by corresponding them. Say, hey, why should I put God and corrupt together? Normally you would not do that in a normal sentence. But if they are positioned in the same position, they get a connection, which is stronger, and then you generate added semantic value. Yes, that's what I was.
We have time for one more question.
I kind of want to go back maybe to a point, I guess, that Suhail brought up in regards to the functor and the embodiment. And I guess you mentioned kind of these pathological topologies.
Yes.
And I guess I was curious whether or not that sort of pathology is sort of defined by you, like that it's not actually something that could be followed by a bodily gesture, and then if there are certain sort of gestures that perhaps only a machine could perform, within some of these potential topologies.
Well, as a mathematician who always applies this kind of conceptual architectures, I've learned that it is always too early to think of concepts, of examples of concepts from what you know, and then saying, oh no, the concept is not good because I have no good example. And I think it's more the question of being capable of defining the kind of the essence of a concept, yes, finding what is really, characteristic for the concept of topology. Thinking of that in the generality, and then looking for examples if you can find them, and kind of come back to the definition of the concept. But I think it's more important to have a kind of a good position of a concept within a concept framework than nice examples. Of course, the normal examples must be there, but all of a sudden you discover, like the continuity, for example. The concept of continuity in mathematics is a standard one, and since Cauchy, and now you think continuity is something which intuitively means you can draw a line. A line is continuous if you can draw it. Now it turns out that the concept is so stupid that you can define continuous functions which you cannot draw in any point. Yes, you cannot draw anything. So now you would say, okay, let's throw the concept away. But mathematicians are kind of clever. They say, okay, so let's add, properties to the concept which then restrict me to those examples which I want to have. So you would just add, I don't know, to continuity, you would perhaps add differentiability, that you have now a tangent everywhere. So then you get more normal things. So I think changing the concept only because you don't have nice example is a bad thing. And I think the humanities has always done that, They always think the concept is kind of the key to everything, but that's not true. It's the architecture of concepts which is much more important, Keep the continuity concept, but add, things. Because in German they say, etwas zur Sprache bringen. I don't know, who knows German here? So that means bring something to the language. That means talk about something means bring it to the language. So what? The thing is moved to the language, yes? And I think this is completely wrong. You have to bring the language to the thing. You have to change the language in order to capture the thing, Not just let the language there and say, this is ineffable. I cannot talk a bit. Let's just change the language and talk about it, I mean, this was the great thing of Newton and Leibniz, when they used the Galilei experiments, who didn't have the language to explain these movements, right? They just had the experiments, but he could not talk about this differentiable thing. And then they exchanged the language, they invented the calculus, and now we can talk about these things in a very precise way. So change the language whenever you think. I don't know whether that answers a little bit.
Thank you.